Welcome to Folk Fear, where every tale is rooted in rot. Here we unearth the whispered horrors buried in blood-soaked soil, the ancestral rituals no one dares speak of, the grief that grew teeth beneath the harvest moon. This isn't the horror of shadows in the closet, it's the horror of tradition, of bone charms hanging from dying trees, of prayers spoken not to protect the living, but to keep the dead from rising. Tonight, we open a new chapter, one of sacred land and secrets planted in silence. In a forgotten village choked by time and ash, there is a grove where no one dares to plant, because every tree feeds on what was buried: teeth, fingers, sorrows, and worse. A man returns, the ground remembers, and the orchard begins to bloom. This is the Bone Orchard, only on Folk Fear. Come closer, but don't step off the path. It began with fog, thick, low, and heavy, like breath held for too long. The car rattled along the gravel road as if resisting the journey itself. Mud-slicked wheels cracked over stones like brittle bones, and the forest on either side leaned closer with each passing mile, as if it remembered Elias and didn't forgive him. He hadn't been back to Hadrav in 12 years, not since the funeral, not since the day he swore he'd never set foot in that village again. But the land pulls, even when you think you've severed every root. Next to him, Ruth slept lightly, her fingers curled against her thigh, twitching in some forgotten dream. The baby bump beneath her coat was barely there, just a soft curve, but enough to make every shadow on the road seem sharper, more dangerous, more waiting. He slowed the car. Ahead, the fog cleared just enough to reveal the sign. Hadrav. A single wooden board nailed crooked to a pole, splintered and gray. No welcome, no population count, just the name, like a tombstone, the final marker before silence. He turned the wheel, and the village emerged. A few dozen houses, most slumped, stone-faced and blinking through weather-stained shutters. The church steeple leaned to the left, like it too had grown tired of standing straight. Moss had overtaken rooftops, ivy swallowing windows, but the bones of the place were still there. The shape hadn't changed. The silence hadn't either. Ruth stirred. "We're here?" "Yeah," Elias said. "Home." She looked out the window, skeptical. "Looks like it's already dead." Elias didn't reply. He couldn't, because part of him had expected that same thing. But the truth was worse. It wasn't dead. Hadrav was still breathing. They passed the church, the closed general store, the rusted pump that used to run fresh water but now coughed only mud. No one waved, no one looked up from porches. The few villagers visible simply watched from behind curtains, like ghosts peeking through shrouds. Then came the orchard. It spread across the western edge of Hadrav, behind the low stone wall his grandfather built by hand, each rock a prayer or a secret. Once this orchard had been alive with apples, golden fruit heavy enough to break branches. But now the trees were bare, their limbs crooked like arthritic fingers, trunks blackened and bowed toward the ground. The earth there was wrong. Elias remembered how it sank when you stepped on it. how it smelled of iron and mildew even in summer, how the elders used to say no one should speak loud in the orchard because the ground could listen. Now the land was quiet, but not empty. Elias parked near the small house that would be theirs. The cottage had belonged to his aunt before she passed. Moss coated the roof like a second skin, and one shutter banged softly in the breeze. Ruth stepped out first. She stretched, looked at the house, the trees, the village behind them. "This is where you want to raise a child?" she said, only half joking. "It's cheap and quiet, but not empty." She turned toward the orchard. "What's that?" Elias hesitated. "They call it the Bone Orchard." Ruth blinked. "Excuse me?" "Old name, local thing. Supposed to be cursed or sacred or whatever." He tried to sound casual. "They say when someone dies, they bury something there, a finger, a tooth. It's meant to keep the sorrow in the ground." "That's comforting," she muttered. "Why not just bury the whole body?" Elias shrugged. "The church has graves. This is for grief." Ruth stared at the trees for a long time before heading toward the cottage. Elias stayed behind. Something pulled at him. The orchard, the soil, the air, the way it smelled like sap and rot. He had dreamed of this place too many times. Only the trees were different then, thicker, taller, greener, and they whispered. The door creaked as he entered the house. Inside it was dust and silence. Old furniture still draped in cloth. The air carried the scent of mold and something else, like dead roses soaked in rain. They spent the rest of the afternoon clearing space, airing out rooms. Ruth busied herself unpacking baby clothes she insisted on bringing, even though the child wasn't due for months. She moved with a mix of anxiety and resolve, as if making the house feel normal would keep the unease at bay. Elias, meanwhile, walked the edge of the orchard. At sunset, the trees seemed to shift. Shadows bent backward. The wind died completely. And just past the third row of trees, he found something buried in the soft soil. A doll's leg, rotten cloth, chewed at the seam, still worn to the touch. He buried it again, without telling Ruth. That night, as the moon slipped behind clouded glass, Ruth whispered in her sleep. Elias leaned close to hear her. Her voice was thin, cracked. "She's under the house," she said. "Who is?" he asked, but she was already quiet again. Elias didn't sleep, not because of fear, but because the orchard had begun to breathe. Morning broke without sound. The fog had thickened overnight, curling beneath the doors, clinging to the windows like a breath held too long. Ruth was already awake, staring at the ceiling, her hands folded across her stomach as if protecting something unseen. "Did you hear it?" she whispered. Elias blinked away sleep. "Hear what?" "A child, crying, somewhere under us." He sat up, listened. Only silence, but it wasn't the clean kind of silence. It was the kind that wraps around you like wet wool, heavy and hiding something. Ruth continued, "I thought it was in the floorboards. It didn't sound like it was outside." Elias rubbed his face. "Probably animals, rats maybe?" "No, it sounded like it missed its mother." He didn't know what to say to that. Instead, he got dressed and stepped outside into the fog. The orchard stood as it had yesterday, still, gnarled, watching. Only now, one of the trees looked different, thicker, as if it had grown overnight, as if it had been fed. He shook the thought off and walked toward the village square. Old man Yurek was already there, smoking a crooked pipe beside the dry well. He'd been the village gravedigger since before Elias was born, wrinkled like bark, eyes clouded with fog of their own. He nodded when Elias approached, but didn't smile. "You came back," Yurek said. "Didn't think you would." "Didn't think I would either. But the house was there, land was cheap." "There's reasons it's cheap, you know." Elias waited. Yurek pointed toward the orchard without looking. "You remember what that land is? Burial ground, of a kind. Not for bodies." The Yurek's man's voice was dry and tired. "For what the body leaves behind. Grief." Yurek nodded. "When we lose someone, we cut something small, a tooth, a finger, a piece of skull, and we bury it in the orchard. Not because it honors the dead, it keeps the sorrow still, anchored. You understand?" Elias tried to, but it made his skin itch. "What happens if you don't?" The old man looked at him then, eyes like smoked glass. "Then grief moves into the house, into the baby, into you." Elias said nothing. Yurek added, "It's not a tradition. It's a warning, one we don't write down." "And who decides what gets buried?" "The orchard does." Yurek smiled without teeth. That afternoon, Elias tried not to think of it. He busied himself around the property, cleaning gutters, repairing the porch step, but his thoughts kept drifting to the orchard, to what he had seen buried in the soil, to the doll's leg that felt too recent. Anya arrived just before dusk. His younger sister hadn't written in years, yet here she was, walking the gravel path in a black coat, pale as chalk. She smiled tightly when Elias hugged her. "You actually came back," she said. "So did you." They stood in silence, looking toward the orchard. "I've been dreaming about it." "The orchard?" Anya nodded. "Since last winter. I didn't know why. Then I woke up 3 nights ago and my hands were covered in dirt. My feet were muddy. I live in the city, Elias. There's no dirt in my building." He looked at her. "Why come here?" She didn't answer at first. Then, "I think the trees remember us." That night, they sat inside, the 3 of them. Ruth tried to make small talk, but the air in the cottage was heavy, the kind of weight that turns every shadow into a shape. Elias stepped outside for air. The orchard rustled softly, no wind, just movement, as if the trees were settling into place or awakening. He turned to go back inside and stopped. At the base of one of the trees, just visible through the mist, was something pale, a hand, small, childlike, not moving. But when Elias blinked, it was gone. The next morning, a villager came knocking. Marta, one of the older women. She brought bread and a warning. "You should not build too close," she said, eyeing the new shed Elias had started near the orchard wall. "Why?" "Because grief spreads when it's disturbed." I tried to laugh. "You all act like grief is a disease." "It is," she replied, "one passed down when it is not spoken aloud. It infects the soil, and from there, everything." He wanted to say something clever, something skeptical, but Ruth opened the door behind him, and her eyes were hollow. "I heard them again," she said. Marta stepped forward. "Then your floor is not clean." "What do you mean?" Marta handed her a pouch. Inside were herbs, dried petals, and what looked like crushed bone. "Burn this at night. It keeps the orchard from crawling inside." Elias started to protest, but Ruth accepted the pouch with both hands.
That evening, as the sky turned to bruised violet, Elias walked the orchard again. The air smelled sweet and wrong, like sap mixed with blood. And there, beneath one of the newer trees, he saw something freshly disturbed, a patch of dirt too soft, a mound that pulsed faintly, as if the earth beneath it had a heartbeat. He stepped closer. Something cracked under his boot. He knelt, brushed aside the soil. A child's molar, fresh, no rot, no dirt crusted in the roots. And nearby, 3 more. Teeth. Too many for one child. He stood quickly, heart pounding. The orchard didn't feel silent anymore. It felt expectant. From behind him, Anya spoke. "I think it wants us to remember." Elias turned. "Remember what?" She looked toward the trees, eyes unfocused. What we buried and what we didn't. By morning, the fog had thinned, but it never truly left. It lingered in the corners, between the floorboards, under the stairs, like a secret the house couldn't stop keeping. Elias stood at the edge of the orchard, shovel in hand, staring at the row of trees that seemed closer than the day before. The previous night's discovery of the teeth still pulsed behind his eyes. He hadn't told Ruth. He wasn't sure he ever would. Some things, he told himself, were better buried, like everything else in this village. Behind him, the shed was nearly finished. The wood creaked with each gust of wind, but it stood solid and clean, a fragile symbol of normalcy. Elias hoped that by building something here, he could rewrite the story this place insisted on telling. But deep down, he could feel it. Every board he nailed, every hole he dug, it was like hammering over a wound that hadn't stopped bleeding. Ruth stepped onto the porch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her face pale. "You didn't sleep again," she said. "Did you?" "Not really." Her voice was thin. "I burned the herbs last night, like Marta said." "Did it help?" She shook her head. The crying stopped, but something else started. Elias looked up. "It was laughter," she whispered. "Small, soft, like a child giggling under the floor." He didn't know what to say. He crossed the grass toward her, trying to keep his voice steady. "We're tired. This place gets in your head. It's just noise." But even as he said it, a knot formed in his chest. He knew what haunted houses sounded like. They creaked, they moaned, they whispered. They didn't laugh. Inside, Anya was still asleep, if it could be called that. She had begun murmuring in her dreams, names, numbers, directions that made no sense. She scratched her arms in her sleep, and once Ruth found dirt under her fingernails. The window in her room faced the orchard. Elias would catch her standing at it, unmoving, long after midnight. That afternoon, Elias went to work clearing the back garden. He wanted to build a small greenhouse for Ruth, a gesture of peace, of hope. But as he dug, the soil gave way too easily. The earth was soft, damp, hungry. The first thing he found was a button. Then a child's shoe. Then a vertebra. He dropped the shovel and stepped back, breath caught in his throat. The bones were small, too small, and white as ash. He buried them again, quickly, not because it was the right thing to do, but because the longer they lay exposed, the more it felt like the trees were watching. Later, he wandered into the village looking for answers. He found Yurik again, sitting outside the chapel, carving something into wood. It looked like a charm, gnarled with holes where eyes should be. "What are you making?" Elias asked. Yurik didn't look up. "A ward." "For what?" "For forgetting." Elias sat beside him. "There are bones under my house." The old man stopped carving. Elias continued. "I found them in the soil. A shoe, teeth, a spine." The old man nodded slowly. That land has been fed many times. By who? By all of us. Elias clenched his fists. Why? The old man finally looked at him. Because it's easier to plant pain than to feel it. Back at the cottage, Ruth stood by the front door with a pale face and a clenched jaw. She was holding something in her hand, a note written in a shaky scrawl. It was under the baby's blanket. Elias took it. It read, "The orchard takes what we bury, but it never forgets who buried it." There was no signature. Anya emerged from her room soon after, her hair tangled, her eyes glassy. "I had a dream," she said. "Tell me." "I was walking in the orchard. The trees were taller than before, and I saw our mother." Elias froze. She was kneeling in the soil, crying, digging with her hands. Her mouth was full of mud, but she kept whispering something. "What?" Anya swallowed. "Don't build here. Don't build over grief." That night, Ruth refused to sleep in the bedroom. She moved to the couch, wrapping herself in the blanket Marta gave her. Elias stayed up, watching the walls, listening. The house didn't laugh that night, but it breathed. The floorboards swelled and creaked in long, rhythmic sighs. The walls whispered in clicks and knocks. Once from under the stairs came a sound like roots snapping, or bones. Near dawn, Elias stepped outside. The shed door was wide open. The interior had been torn apart, wood panels split, tools scattered like bones in a jaw. And in the center of the floor, carved deep into the dirt, was a shape, a spiral of teeth, real teeth, human, laid there like an offering. He dropped to his knees, heart thundering, breath shallow. The orchard stood beyond, still, quiet, unmoved, but not empty. The next morning, Elias did not speak of the teeth, not to Ruth, not to Anya, not even to himself. He simply swept the dirt back into the spiral, nailed the shed door shut, and pretended the night had been quiet. But silence, like soil, hides things, and some things were beginning to rise. Ruth was outside when he returned. She stood by the garden, holding a trowel in one hand and a clump of roots in the other. "I was going to plant something," she said softly. "Something to feel normal again. Tomatoes, maybe, or herbs." Elias nodded, weary. "But the soil won't take it," she added. "What do you mean?" She turned the dirt with her foot. "It rejects it. I dug down maybe 6 inches, and the roots were already there, black and tight, like something didn't want me to plant anything new." Elias moved beside her. The ground did feel different here, not loose, not soft, tense. He knelt, pressed his fingers into the earth, and felt it, something hard. He dug, slowly, then faster. Within seconds, he uncovered a sliver of bone, white, clean, a human finger, curled inward like it had died reaching for help. Ruth stared. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "That's not old." Elias picked it up carefully. "How can you tell?" "No moss, no rot. It's warm." He dropped it instinctively. The finger rolled onto its side and stopped, pointing toward the orchard. Neither of them spoke. Inside, Anya stood by the window, watching the trees. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glass, like a second self waiting to be born. She didn't look away when they came in. "You found it, didn't you?" she asked. Elias paused. "Found what?" "The first piece. The first, each time it begins, There's a first piece, a tooth, a finger, something small to open the way. The orchard doesn't ask for everything at once. Ruth stared at her. What do you mean by each time? Anya's eyes didn't blink. This isn't the first harvest. Later, Ruth burned more herbs. The smoke filled the house with a scent like burnt sugar and old dust. Elias opened the windows, but the smell clung to the curtains, the floors, their skin. Even the baby seemed to stir within Ruth's belly, restless. That night, the wind returned. It howled through the trees like breath through hollow ribs, and the house groaned in reply. Elias dreamed. He stood in the orchard, barefoot, the soil warm beneath his feet. Around him, the trees swayed without wind, their limbs twitching like the fingers of buried giants. One tree opened. Its trunk split down the middle, wide as a mouth. Inside, he saw shelves, rows and rows of bones arranged like books, finger bones tied with string, skulls with names carved into them, tiny ribs placed in baskets of woven hair. And at the center, something pulsing, a heart, but not his. It beat slowly, and with each thud a new tree sprouted nearby, bark covered with teeth, roots coiled around toys and shoes and baby blankets. He reached for the heart. It opened its eye. Elias woke up, choking. The bedroom smelled of soil. He sat up, heart pounding, and turned to find Ruth still asleep, curled against the far wall. Anya was not in her room. The front door was ajar. He rushed out barefoot, following damp footprints through the grass, through the mist, to the orchard. He found her in the third row, kneeling. Her hands were coated in mud. Her nightgown was soaked. She was digging with her fingers, slow and methodical. "Anya," he whispered. She didn't look up. He moved closer. "Anya, stop!" She turned toward him. Her eyes were bloodshot. Her lips were trembling. "I found her," she whispered. "I found Mama." And from the pit she had dug, something white grinned upward. A skull, cracked and small, but not their mother's. A child's, no bigger than a melon, wrapped in cloth, fingers missing. Anya began to cry. Elias dropped to his knees and pulled her away. She didn't resist. Behind them, the trees swayed again, not with wind, but with breath. Back at the house, Ruth waited on the porch, arms wrapped around her belly. She didn't ask where they had been. She already knew. That night, Elias boarded the windows. He nailed the door shut. He sat on the floor with a hammer in his lap and watched the walls for signs of movement. And when the crying came again, soft, wet, muffled beneath the floorboards, he didn't move. Because now he understood. The orchard did not grow fruit. It grew reminders. The house no longer held time. The clock on the wall had stopped ticking sometime in the early hours. The hour hand rested just past 3, though Elias couldn't remember when it had last moved. The air was thick and sour, as if the walls had started to sweat. Ruth hadn't spoken since the discovery in the orchard. She carried her silence like armor. Sometimes she stared at the floor for minutes at a time, unmoving, as if listening for something beneath the boards. Elias tried to fix things. He patched the shed, cleaned the garden, burned the herbs, told himself over and over that the trees would stop growing, that the bones had run out. But the orchard was patient, and grief was infinite. That night, it began again. At 2:17 a.m., Elias woke to the sound of footsteps. Not loud, not hurried, just steady, bare feet on wooden floorboards. He rose slowly. Ruth lay beside him, still asleep. He stepped out into the hall and saw her, Anya. She was walking toward the front door, eyes open but glassy. Her hands hung limp at her sides. Her nightgown dragged slightly at the hem, darkened by damp soil. "Anya," he whispered. She didn't stop, didn't blink, didn't breathe like someone awake. He followed her silently, barefoot. She opened the door with surprising ease, despite it being nailed earlier that day, and stepped out into the cold fog. The night had teeth. The wind bit at his skin, but Anya moved like she didn't feel it at all. Her feet found the path to the orchard without hesitation, like a groove carved into her bones. She walked between the trees. She did not tremble. She did not hesitate. And then she stopped. She knelt beside the largest tree, one Elias hadn't noticed before. Its trunk was black and smooth, bark like folded silk, and its branches hung low like arms cradling the air. Anya placed her hand on the soil. "Shh," she whispered to no one. I know. She began to dig, not with panic, not like the first time, but with care, with purpose, like someone planting, not searching. Elias stepped closer. "Anya, stop!" Her body froze. Her fingers paused mid-motion. Then, without looking at him, she said, "She wants to come back." Elias knelt beside her. "Who?" Anya turned her head. Her eyes were darker now, deeper, as if the iris had widened into something bottomless. "Our sister." Elias felt cold seep into his chest. "We didn't have a sister." Anya blinked slowly. "We did, but we weren't allowed to remember. She died too small, too fast. Mama planted her in the orchard so the grief wouldn't kill us. She grew here. That's why the tree leans." Elias stared at the tree, its curved trunk bending to one side, like the bowed back of someone who had been kneeling too long. He felt a weight on his chest, something between sorrow and revulsion. "This isn't possible," he said. "You were 6 when Mama died. I was 10. Anya nodded. "Old enough to forget what you're told to forget." She lowered her hand to the soil again. "I don't sleepwalk anymore," she said softly. "I just go where she calls." The next morning, Anya didn't remember anything. She ate toast. She folded laundry. She smiled faintly when Ruth spoke. She never mentioned the orchard. But when Elias checked her feet, there were traces of mud in her heel creases. That evening, Ruth found a new mark on the nursery wall. A handprint, small, too small to be hers, too high to be from a child. It was pressed above the crib they hadn't built yet, just a faint, greasy outline, as if made by something that didn't have skin anymore. They scrubbed it off. It came back the next night. Anya wandered again that week, always between 2 and 4 in the morning, always barefoot, always returning before dawn with her hands stained dark. Sometimes she hummed lullabies in her sleep. Sometimes she whispered things in a tongue Elias didn't know. Once he followed her and heard her muttering numbers aloud. 12, 21, 3 beneath, 4 unborn. He tried writing them down. They changed every night, but always ended with the same phrase: feed the root, starve the grief. Ruth grew quieter. She began sitting in the garden during the day, staring at the shed like it was a door she didn't want to open. She often touched her stomach, her face thoughtful and tense. The baby moves when the trees rustle, even if there's no wind. Elias reached for her hand, but she didn't move. "Do you think we brought something here?" she asked. "No, I think it was always here, waiting." That night, the trees creaked like ribs under pressure. Elias didn't sleep. He watched the window, the hallway, the orchard. At 3:12 a.m., Anya rose again. But this time, she didn't go to the orchard. She walked into the nursery. She stood there, unmoving, staring at the wall where the handprint had reappeared. Then she whispered, "She's not in the ground anymore."
It rained that morning. A soft, bitter rain that soaked the soil and ran down the orchard trees in streaks like tears. Elias stood at the window, watching the droplets form crooked lines on the glass. Each one twisted slightly as it fell, like the house itself was slouching toward something it couldn't resist. Inside, the air had changed. The walls seemed thinner now, not in structure, but in barrier, as if something on the other side could finally hear them, or worse, reach through. Anya made breakfast, humming to herself, the same lullaby each morning, always the same 5 notes. Elias tried to remember where it came from, but his memory was fogged, thick with years of forgetting. It felt old, older than their mother. Ruth barely touched her food. "I felt her again last night," she whispered. "Walking the halls, she stopped by the crib." Elias didn't ask how she knew it was her. He already believed. Later that afternoon, Elias walked to the village again. The gravel paths seemed narrower now. The trees leaned closer. Everything in Hodrov was starting to curve inward, as if the land was folding over itself. He found Jurek by the chapel. The old man was sharpening a small blade, hunched over like the bench was made of memory. "I need to know what you buried," Elias said without greeting. Jurek didn't look up. "We buried what grief gave us, pieces, fragments, sorrows that couldn't be spoken. And if they weren't buried?" Jurek ran the blade slow along the stone. "They festered, turned into things that wanted, things that wondered. We learned that the hard way." Elias stepped forward. "You fed the orchard." Jurek nodded. "Better the grounds than the living." "That's not peace, that's fear dressed in folklore." The old man paused. "You don't understand grief, boy. You ran from it. We planted it. That was our mistake. You're making the second one, digging it up." Elias's voice dropped. "What is it growing into?" Jurek's hand trembled slightly. "Into what was never allowed to finish dying." Elias left without another word. Back at the house, Ruth had set up candles in a ring around the nursery. Her eyes were tired, her cheeks hollowed. She looked like someone bracing for labor and exorcism in the same breath. She said, "I read something in Marta's old book, a charm, an offering to stop the digging." "You want to feed it?" She didn't blink. "I want it to stop." Anya entered from outside, her dress soaked, hands coated in clay. She didn't speak. She walked into the kitchen and placed something on the table. A jar.
filled with small bones, bird bones, and one human knuckle. "Where did you get that?" Elias asked. Anya smiled faintly. "They were already under the roots. I just listened." That night they performed the charm. Ruth stood in the center of the nursery, holding the jar. Elias poured salt in a circle around her. Anya whispered the lullaby over and over, her voice distant, eyes half closed. They burned the herbs, spoke the words, waited. The air thickened, the lights dimmed without flickering, and from under the floor they heard movement, not skittering, but crawling, as if the house itself had veins. Then silence, and then a knock from under the crib. 3 slow knocks, knuckle against wood. Ruth dropped the jar, the bones scattered, and every candle died. They didn't sleep that night. The next day, Elias decided to dig again. Not near the house, not near the garden, in the orchard itself. He brought a spade and no hope. He chose a tree he didn't recognize, thicker than the rest, with bark that looked almost polished. When he placed his hand against it, it was warm, pulsing faintly, breathing. He dug, inch by inch, and after 2 feet of resistance, the ground gave way. A hollow. Inside, a wrapped bundle, cloth, soaked and stiff. He pulled it up, unwrapped it slowly. A dress, tiny, laced, browned with age, dotted with dried blood. And inside it, a small wooden doll, hand-carved, cracked at the head. The name Lenka scratched faintly into the back. He didn't recognize the name, but he took it home anyway. When Ruth saw it, she turned pale. "I've seen that name in my dreams," she whispered. "The girl in the orchard. She calls herself that. She keeps saying she was forgotten." Elias placed the doll on the porch, unsure of what offering it would become. That night, the crying stopped, but the trees began to lean closer.
The doll stayed on the porch for 3 days. No one touched it. No one spoke about it. But everyone noticed that since placing it there, the house had grown quieter. The crying had stopped. The laughter had stopped. Even the wind, which once pushed through the cracks and whistled like a lost hymn, had vanished. At first, Ruth thought it was peace. Then she realized it was stillness. And stillness was worse, because it meant something was waiting. Elias spent those 3 days hammering new boards into the shed roof, then tearing them down again, as if movement might keep his thoughts from unraveling. But every swing of the hammer echoed too loudly. Every creak of the nails reminded him that the house had never truly belonged to them. That night, the floor began to weep. It started in the nursery. Ruth stepped in to find the crib damp, not wet, but glistening. The floor beneath it was soaked, not with water. The moisture was thicker, slightly sticky, with a faint smell of copper and decay. She touched it. It clung to her fingertips. She wiped them on her dress, but the mark didn't go away. Elias came in, saw the smear, and fell quiet. "There's no leak," he said. "I checked the pipes. The ceiling's dry." Ruth knelt and pressed her ear to the floor. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, a sob, soft, muffled, and right beneath her.
She jerked back. I heard it, like a child crying into a pillow. Anya entered, drawn by the silence that followed. Her eyes were wide, but not surprised. It's not crying, she said. Elias turned to her. Then what is it? Anya stepped forward, slowly. It's grieving. That night the sounds spread. First the nursery, then the hallway, then beneath the bedroom door. It wasn't always weeping. Sometimes it was the sound of breathing, sometimes scratching, sometimes digging. Elias ripped up a floorboard near the front door. Nothing underneath, just dirt, damp and dense. He dug down 6 inches, then 12, then more. Still nothing until his fingers touched wood. He scraped the soil away. A box, child-sized, rotted at the edges. He pulled it up slowly. Inside, a dress, pale blue, mold blooming along the hem, a lock of hair still tied with a ribbon, and a note scrawled in trembling handwriting. Grief unplanted becomes grief reborn. Ruth gasped when she saw it. That's my mother's handwriting. Elias turned. You said your family wasn't from here. They weren't. She never spoke of this place, not once. They burned the box that night. The smoke curled up through the chimney like black ribbons, dancing in shapes they didn't want to name. But the floor didn't quiet. It sobbed louder. The sound of 100 voices, low and aching, echoed through the wood. Ruth stood barefoot on the boards, both hands on her belly, her eyes hollow. It wants the child, she said. Elias's breath caught. No, it's not asking, she whispered. It's remembering. It's mourning all the ones who never got to be born, and it thinks ours is next. Elias slammed his fist against the wall. Then we leave. We get out. Now. We take what we need and go. Anya didn't move. It won't let us go. We're not cursed, Elias snapped. Anya looked up. You don't have to be cursed when you're rooted. That night, Ruth dreamed of footsteps pacing beneath the house, not walking across, beneath, as if someone was lost in a crawlspace that didn't exist. She heard whispering from under the floorboards, names she didn't know, and one she did. Lenka. The voice was thin, female, barely audible. And then, you left me in the dark. She woke screaming. Elias held her as she shook, her body cold, skin damp. The crying from the floor had returned, louder now. More voices, some angry, some begging. And in the nursery, water dripped from the ceiling. Except it wasn't water. It was milk. Pale, sour-smelling milk that pooled beneath the crib like a newborn's offering. Elias tore the crib apart, but the puddle kept growing. They slept on the porch that night, next to the doll, next to the silence, where the wood did not weep.
Dawn came slowly, not with sunlight. Hadrev had not seen clear sky in weeks, but with a slight thinning of the gloom, a softer gray, as if the darkness had merely stepped back, not left. Elias stood at the edge of the orchard, bare feet pressing into the damp ground. He didn't know why he was drawn there. Perhaps because the house had begun to whisper in too many tongues. Perhaps because the porch, once a place of safety, now reeked faintly of spoiled milk. Or perhaps because the doll was gone. It had vanished sometime in the night. No wind had blown it away, no animal could have carried it. The porch boards were clean, too clean, as if it had been lifted, taken,
Ruth hadn't said a word. She simply stared at the empty spot where the doll once sat, her face pale and unreadable. Elias wanted to speak, but there were no words anymore that could hold the shape of what was happening. Instead, he walked the orchard. He counted the trees as he passed. There were more now. He was sure of it. Rows that hadn't existed a week ago. Trunks that had not yet twisted into the shapes of limbs. Some bark was pale, sickly pale. One even shimmered faintly like flesh under moonlight. He stopped when he saw the first blossom. It grew near the base of a short, knotted tree. A single white flower, trembling slightly despite the absence of wind. Its petals were curled like fingers. Its center, a soft yellow hue, resembled a child's tooth. Elias crouched, studying it. He reached out, touched it. Soft, warm. The blossom sighed, a sound so faint it could have been imagination. But then another bloomed beside it, and another. Within minutes, the tree was covered, white blossoms, all shaped like teeth. He staggered back. Other trees began to bloom as well, not slowly, not seasonally, hungrily. Blossoms unfolded from bark like sores bursting open. Some dripped sap the color of rust. Others trembled with a pulse too steady to be mere wind play. He ran, back to the house. But even there the change had begun. Vines now crept up the foundation, thin, pale green, with thorns shaped like claws. The soil around the house had darkened to near black, soft and spongy beneath the grass. Inside, Ruth was holding something. A blossom. One of the tooth-like flowers, resting gently in her open palm. It came through the window, just landed on the crib like a kiss, she quietly said. Elias took it from her hand. It pulsed once before going still. He threw it into the fire. It didn't burn. The flames curled around it, then went dim. The blossom rolled from the ash onto the floor, unmarred. Anya spoke from the hallway. It's harvesting. What we never mourned, what we tried to forget. Why now? Elias asked. Why not all those years ago? Anya's voice trembled. Because we left. And now, we came back. They slept in shifts that night. Elias stayed awake watching the windows. Around 2 a.m. he saw something. The orchard was glowing. Faint, white light, thousands of blossoms pulsing in rhythm. It looked like a heartbeat spreading through the trees. The branches swayed, not gently, not with breeze, but in agreement. And then, a sound, like something ripping, from deep within the orchard. A low groan followed, like wood snapping, but too wet. He wanted to investigate, but his legs did not move. His body remembered something his mind would not. The next morning, the grass was covered in petals, white, bone-shaped, some sharp at the edges like teeth that had broken mid-bite. Ruth found one in the sink, another in her boot. One rested on her pillow. The blossoms were spreading. Elias returned to Urek that day. The old man was not outside, not at the chapel, not in the square. He found him finally at the cemetery, kneeling beside a grave, hands filled with dirt. "What are you doing?" Elias asked. Urek didn't turn. "Trying to bury something before it's too late. Tell me what the blossoms mean." Urek sighed. "They're not blossoms." Elias blinked. "They're mouths," the old man said. "Tiny mouths. The orchard is trying to speak, and when it speaks, things begin to wake. Back at the house, Ruth was sitting in the corner of the nursery, arms wrapped around her belly. Her skin had a faint shimmer to it, like tree sap that hadn't dried. She looked at Elias with wide, frightened eyes. "Something moved inside me," she said, "but not like before, not like the baby. It felt wrong." She pulled up her shirt. Across the side of her abdomen was a single pale line, thin, fresh, curved like a root trying to find soil. Elias fell to his knees. It was beginning to grow inside her. Not just life, memory. The orchard was blooming, and it was planting itself in them.
Anya stood at the foot of Elias's bed. It was still dark, the hour of liminal breath, when the night isn't quite over, but the day hasn't begun. She didn't speak. She simply stood there, her arms hanging limp, her hair wet as if she'd stepped out of fog. Elias opened his eyes and froze. "Anya?" he whispered. She didn't respond. Then, slowly, she reached into the pocket of her robe and pulled something out. A small femur, child-sized, pale, smooth, still glistening with dew, or perhaps something else. She placed it gently on his chest, then turned and walked away. Elias sat up, trembling, staring down at the bone. It wasn't old, it wasn't clean, it was fresh. He rose, following her, but Anya had already returned to her bed, curled beneath her blanket, sleeping soundly. No signs of the trance, no soil on her feet, no moisture on her hands. He stood in the doorway and watched her chest rise and fall. Outside, the orchard groaned. The next morning, the femur was still on the table where Elias had left it. Ruth picked it up gently, as if it were a religious relic. "It was never just about grief," she murmured. "It's about what grief becomes when we try to contain it." Elias didn't reply. The air felt heavier. It clung to the walls, thick with the scent of sap and iron. Outside the windows, the blossoms had started to fall, not as petals, but as fragments, chips of something too brittle to be wood, tiny pieces of something once alive. The orchard was shedding. That afternoon, they saw it happen. A tree near the edge of the grove, once barren, began to bend forward. Its branches reached toward the ground like arms stretching after a long sleep. Then, with a sudden heave, it dropped something at its base. A bundle, wrapped in stained cloth. Ruth and Elias watched from the porch, breath held, eyes wide. Elias approached it slowly, heart pounding. The bundle moved. He crouched, hand trembling, and unwrapped it. Inside, a doll, but not like the first one. This one had hair, real hair, braided, and the face wasn't carved, it was stitched, carefully, lovingly, with eyes made from 2 white buttons, one of them chipped. And beneath the doll, tucked into the folds of cloth, a note, written in the same hand as before. "First harvest returns what was planted without name." Ruth sank to her knees. "That was mine," she whispered. Elias turned. "What?" "That was my doll, when I was a child. My mother said it disappeared during a storm. We never found it. We weren't from here, Elias, but I think she was." The orchard had remembered. That night, Anya did not sleepwalk. Instead, she sat at the window, humming softly, rocking back and forth. "I think they're almost done growing. The ones beneath." "Beneath what?"
Elias asked. She looked at him, her eyes glistening. The floor, the crib, the orchard, the memory. She paused. They're not just blooming, they're crowning. Elias didn't sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed, holding the doll, staring at the moonless sky. The soil had changed color, blacker, wetter. It reflected no light, as if it drank what touched it. Sometime around 3, he heard it, the sound of something breaking, a snap, then another, then a wet slurping noise, like roots pulling through soft flesh. He ran outside barefoot, heart hammering in his chest, and there, near the center of the orchard, one of the largest trees had split open. Its bark peeled back like flesh, revealing a hollow within. Inside, bones, not buried, not arranged, but grown. Ribs twisted around roots, vertebrae curled like tendrils, a skull blooming from the trunk like a rotten flower. And below it all, buried in the roots, a cradle, old, wooden, cracked, rocking slightly on its own. He stepped closer. A hand reached out, small, pale, fingers curling toward him. He fell back in horror, scrambling through the mud, gasping for breath. When he looked again, the cradle was still, empty. But the tree had shifted. Its branches curled into a shape, a gesture, an invitation. He ran. Back inside, Ruth met him at the door, tears streaking her face. It kicked again, but this time it wasn't feet. She lifted her shirt. Across her belly, faint outlines pressed against the skin. Fingers, tiny hands pushing from the inside, just for a moment, then gone. She collapsed into his arms. They didn't sleep. They didn't speak. At dawn, Anya opened the front door and placed a basin of water on the ground. Inside it, she dropped a single tooth. She knelt and she whispered, "For the first harvest, feed what we buried, take what we owe."
The orchard never forgets. That was the first thought Elias had as he stepped beneath the trees at dawn, the soil wet against his boots, the branches sighing like they recognized him. The morning was colder than usual, and the air felt thick with memory, like the fog was made of old breath. Around him, the blossoms had begun to wilt, not from age, but from use. Their petals curled inward, darkened at the tips like burned paper. Some oozed sap that dripped onto the earth in slow, pulsing droplets. The ground welcomed each drop like it was being fed. Elias moved carefully through the rows. Every tree looked different now, less like trees and more like monuments. Each trunk bore a scar, a split, or a growth that resembled something once human. One had a cluster of knuckles near the base. Another sprouted what looked like a string of baby teeth along a low-hanging branch. He stopped at the heart of the grove, the oldest tree, the one with the split trunk and the cradle buried beneath its roots. Today, the cradle was gone. In its place, a mirror, cracked, clouded, hanging from a branch by a string of braided hair. When Elias looked into it, he didn't see his reflection. He saw the past. A girl kneeling in the orchard, hands muddy, face wet with tears, digging. Then another image. His mother, younger, holding a bundle wrapped in white, walking between the trees with bare feet. Her mouth moved, but the mirror gave no sound. Then another image. Yurek, years younger, holding a jar of teeth, crying. The images came faster.
Villagers weeping, mothers screaming into their hands, children wandering into the trees and returning changed. Hands burying bones, mouths whispering names, every sorrow ever swallowed by the people of Hadrav, now unspooling like a vine. The orchard remembered it all. It wasn't a burial ground, it was a library of grief. Elias stepped back, trembling. Behind him, Anya appeared. She looked pale, almost translucent in the morning fog. Her eyes were hollowed out by nights without rest, but her hands were steady. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked softly. Elias nodded. "It keeps it all," she said. "Every death, every silence. It grows it, tends it, like grief is a crop." She held something in her hand, a ribbon. "I found this under my bed. It was mine, from when I was a child. Mama used to braid my hair and tie it with this." "It must have fallen from the attic," Elias said. Anya shook her head. "We never had an attic." That night, Ruth began speaking in her sleep. Not words at first, just sounds, moans, whispers. Then names. Lena, Teresa, Myra, Danek. Elias wrote them down, names he'd never heard before. The next day he brought the list to Marta, the only elder still willing to answer questions. She paled when she saw the paper. "These were the first children," she whispered. "The ones from the hunger year, when the sickness came. The ones we didn't have room to bury." Elias's voice caught. "So you fed them to the orchard?" "We preserved them, so we didn't have to feel it, so it wouldn't pass to the next generation." "But it has," he said. "Hasn't it?" She looked away. Later that evening, Elias returned to the orchard. This time he brought no tools, no fire, no salt. He came as a witness. He stopped at the mirror again, now darker, the hair string fraying at the ends. He looked into it. He saw himself, but younger, crying at a graveside, a child's casket, one he couldn't remember. Behind him, the trees groaned. Anya called from the porch. "It's remembering you too." He turned to her. "What do we do?" She held up the ribbon. "We give it back." Together, they walked into the orchard. They found a place where the soil seemed thinner, newer, as if the tree hadn't yet learned how to hide its hunger. They dug. No tools, just hands. And when the dirt gave way, they found cloth, small, stiff, wrapped tightly. Anya unwrapped it. A braid of hair. Her own, still tied with the ribbon she had brought. "I think we were buried here," she said quietly. "We didn't die." "No. But we were forgotten. And that's almost the same thing." That night, the house moaned, not from the wind, but from memory waking in the walls. Ruth paced the nursery, whispering names she'd never learned. The floor pulsed, and beneath the boards, something began to move. Not crawling, not digging, but rising.
The village had always been quiet.
Now it was too quiet, as if the entire place had pulled in its breath, waiting for something to pass or rise. The silence settled on rooftops like ash, thick in every gutter, every window pane, every space between words that no one dared to speak. Elias could feel it in his bones, the weight of it, the stillness, the watching. It wasn't just the orchard anymore. The village itself had begun to remember. That morning, he went to Marta. She met him in her kitchen, hands trembling as she prepared tea, though neither of them drank it. He laid the list of names on the table. More had been added overnight, not by him, by Ruth, written in her sleep, in looping, delicate handwriting. Children, all of them. Marta stared at the list for a long time. Finally, Elias broke the silence. "Tell me everything." She didn't lift her eyes. "There were sacrifices," she said softly, "in the old winters, when crops failed, when fevers came. The elders feared that grief would rot the village faster than death itself. So you started burying pieces of the dead? Not just the dead, the grief, Elias. We believed if we fed it to the land, it would stay quiet." "And did it?" "For a while." Elias clenched his jaw. "And the orchard? It grew from sorrow. It thrived on memory. The more we buried, the more it bloomed. But it was never just a graveyard. It was a vessel." "For what?" She met his eyes then. "For the pain we didn't want to carry." Outside, the wind howled, not through the trees, through the village, as if the houses had mouths now. Marta continued. "When a child was lost, we planted a bone, a lock of hair, a tooth. We said their name only once, then never again, and the orchard held them, rooted their grief into the soil." Elias felt sick. "You erased them." "We tried to survive," she whispered. "That's what forgetting was, a kind of mercy." "No," he said, "it was cowardice." Marta didn't argue. Back at the house, Ruth was in the nursery, staring at the crib, not crying, not speaking, just staring. And Anya sat in the hallway, humming again, the same 5-note lullaby, louder now. Elias stepped past them both. He entered the room where the weeping floorboards had once sobbed. Now they pulsed, like something beneath them was breathing in unison with the house itself. He knelt, placed his hand on the wood. It was warm, and deep beneath it he heard not a cry, but a voice. "You were supposed to leave." He jerked back. The voice was his mother's. Later, as dusk fell and the orchard groaned, Elias sat with Ruth on the porch. The air buzzed with static. The trees swayed without wind. "She knew," Ruth said suddenly. "Who?" "My mother. She knew this place. That doll was not lost in a storm. It was taken. She buried things here. I can feel it in my blood, like I was born into a memory I didn't make." He took her hand. The skin along her wrist was changing, veins turning dark, faint patterns forming beneath her skin, like roots twisting just under the surface. "I don't think I can carry it much longer," she whispered. "Not just the baby, the weight." Inside, Anya began laughing. Not loud, not joyful, just a soft, slow, rising sound that didn't belong to her voice. They rushed to her. She was standing in the kitchen, her eyes wide, staring at the wall. Etched into the plaster, dozens of names, scratched by hand, some in cursive, some in block letters, all childlike. Elias stepped closer. His own name was there. Not once, but 3 times, each scratched deeper than the last. He turned to Anya. "What does it mean?" She smiled faintly. We've died here before." That night, Marta came to the house, uninvited. Her eyes were red, her hands raw. She held something wrapped in linen. "A final mourning," she said, her voice cracking. She opened the cloth. Inside was a tooth, large, blackened, human, and on its root, carved into the enamel, was a symbol, a spiral made of ribs. Elias stared. "What is this?" "It's hers," Marta said. "Whose?" "The first mother, the one who began it, the one who planted the orchard, not with grief, but with vengeance." "She's still here?" Elias asked. "She never left." Ruth stepped forward. "Where is she buried?" Marta trembled. "That's the thing. She wasn't buried at all. She was fed to the roots whole." The house shuddered. The lights dimmed. From beneath the floor, a sound began. Low, rumbling, steady. A heartbeat. Not the baby's. Something deeper, older. The orchard was waking up, and every warning never spoken was now echoing through the walls like thunder.
The floorboards moved that night, not with creaks or groans, but with purpose. They pulsed, soft, rhythmic, like breath, or worse, like fingers pressing up from beneath, feeling the underbelly of the house as if testing it, measuring it, mapping it. Elias felt it first beneath his feet, a slow bulge in the wood, a hollow thud where there should have been solid support. When he pressed his heel against it, the floor flexed ever so slightly, then settled. He stood in the hallway, holding his breath, and then it came. A child's voice, faint, fuzzy, like it came through water. "Is it safe yet?" He dropped to his knees, ear pressed to the floor. Another whisper followed. "She said we could come out when the crying stopped." Elias jerked away, heart pounding. He stumbled back into the nursery. Ruth was sitting in the rocking chair, unmoving, staring at the crib as if watching something that hadn't arrived yet. "It spoke," Elias said. She didn't respond. He crossed the room and crouched beside her. "The floor. There are children under there." She finally looked at him. "I know. You've heard them?" She nodded. "They whisper every night. Sometimes they sing." Her eyes brimmed with tears. "They're waiting, Elias, waiting for someone to say it's okay to come back." Elias felt sick. "But they're not alive." She shook her head. "They never got to be." Later that morning, Anya found drawings beneath her pillow. Crude, childlike, scratched onto parchment-thin paper that smelled of mildew and dust. One showed a tree with eyes. Another showed a house with no roof and dozens of stick-figure children staring up from beneath the floor. One, folded tightly into a square, simply showed a crib with a black shape curled inside it. She held the last one up to the window. The figure inside the crib shimmered when backlit, drawn not in ink or charcoal, but in ashes. That evening, Elias returned to the orchard. He didn't bring tools, just a list of names Ruth had written in her sleep. He called them aloud, one by one, softly. With each name, a tree creaked, branches bent, roots twitched. The wind didn't blow, but the trees swayed as if nodding in recognition. When he spoke the name Lenka, a single blossom fell from the oldest tree. He picked it up. It dissolved in his palm. That night, the floorboards wept again, not with grief, but longing. The sound was unmistakable. Dozens of small hands tapping, scratching, asking, "May we come in?" Elias stayed awake, sitting in the middle of the hallway with salt in a circle around him. He whispered, "I'm sorry.
You were never meant to be forgotten. You were never meant to be hidden like secrets." The scratching stopped. Ruth dreamed again. She stood in a field of graves, ankle-deep in fog. The headstones had no names, only handprints. From the mist, children emerged, dozens of them, eyes black as soil, skin pale and glowing. Each carried something, a bone, a toy, a braid of hair, a tooth. They surrounded her in silence. Then one stepped forward, a girl with no lips, her mouth sewn shut, but eyes filled with sorrow so deep it spilled out like smoke. She reached forward, placed her palm on Ruth's stomach, and whispered, despite the stitches, "This one is ours." Ruth woke up screaming. Elias held her. She was bleeding, just a little, but enough to know the orchard had found its way inside her. He called Marta at dawn, demanded answers, demanded help, but no one answered. The line was dead. So was her house. He found it abandoned, cold, empty. No signs of struggle. Only a single blossom on her pillow, pulsing faintly, breathing. That night, the whispers returned, this time from every room. "Can we come upstairs now? We've been quiet. We remember your names." Elias fell to his knees and screamed, "What do you want?" The voices answered together, soft and reverent. "A place at the table." Anya stood in the doorway, holding a broken chair leg in her hand. "Then we give it to them," she said. "We make room." Elias shook his head. "They're not children anymore." Anya's voice dropped to a whisper. "No, they're grief, and they've waited long enough."
The trees never grew upward. That was the realization that struck Elias at dawn, standing barefoot in the orchard's heart, listening to the windless rustle of ancient limbs. They grew down. Their branches clawed toward the sky like desperate hands, but their true strength, their true hunger, was buried, hidden, rooted so deeply that it wrapped around things no one remembered planting. He could feel it now, beneath the soles of his feet. Not dirt, not stone, something pulsing, like tendons, like memory with veins. Anya had told him in whispers during the night, her voice thin and shaken, that the dreams were no longer dreams. She was walking through the roots now, seeing inside them. "They're not just feeding on grief, they're made of it," she said. The roots beneath the orchard weren't only trees. They were a system of memory, a network of sorrow bound together by silence. And now they were awakening. Ruth lay resting in bed, eyes half closed, murmuring names with each breath. The bleeding had stopped, but something had taken its place. A pattern was forming on her stomach, faint lines like veins spreading from beneath the skin, branching outward like vines or roots. She didn't seem afraid. She seemed resigned. "They've chosen me," she whispered, "to carry it forward." Elias knelt beside her. "Carry what?" Her voice was distant. The weight, the memory, the seed. Later that morning, he took a shovel to the orchard. He wasn't sure what he meant to do. Maybe dig down to the source. Maybe unearth whatever still breathed in the black. Maybe destroy it. But the soil fought him. Not in a physical way. There was no resistance. The shovel slid through it like flesh. But the deeper he dug, the more the air changed. The orchard grew quiet, then too quiet. Birds fled.
The breeze died, the trees stilled. It was the silence of something watching. At 4 feet deep, the metal of the shovel struck something hollow. He knelt, brushed away the soil with trembling fingers. Wood, old, splintered, painted once long ago in a shade of white that now looked like spoiled milk. He scraped more away. The box was larger than a coffin, too wide, too square. He opened it. Inside were roots, twisting, snarled, but not plant. Hair. Dozens of braids, locks tied with ribbons, knots of childhood, some still wrapped in disintegrating fabric. At the bottom, a single page, protected in wax cloth. He unfolded it with care. It was a family tree, but not his. The names were unfamiliar until one caught his eye. Lenka, at the very top. Not as a child, but as the first mother. Below her, branches fanned out, not with dates of birth, but with burial markers. And every one ended the same way, fed to root. Elias dropped the page. Behind him, the soil shifted. He turned just in time to see a hand emerge from the ground, not living, not skeletal, but rooted. Its fingers were bark, its nails were petals, its wrist twisted back into soil like a vine being pulled through flesh. He fell backward, scrambling from the pit. The trees began to hum, a low, droning vibration that moved through his chest like a second heartbeat. That night, the hum continued, through the house, through the floor, through Ruth. She sat in the nursery, eyes glassy, whispering lullabies she'd never learned. "The roots remember," she said. Elias stood in the doorway, unable to speak. "I thought grief was something we moved on from, but it's not. It grows." Her eyes met his, and when you try to bury it, it just digs deeper. She lifted her shirt. The patterns on her belly had changed. Now they looked like branches, faint lines extending from her ribs to her hips, radiating outward like a tree ring, counting down to something ancient and terrible. Anya entered behind him. She carried a bundle, a swaddle. It wasn't for a baby. It was filled with dirt, and in the center, wrapped like a gift, was another bone. Tiny, smooth, still red at the tip. "I found it beneath my bed," she said. "They're climbing up." The house groaned. From beneath the boards, the tapping returned. Faster now, urgent. Dozens of small fists, dozens of voices. "We are growing! We are remembering! We are becoming!" Elias wanted to scream. Instead, he whispered, "What do you want from us?" And the orchard answered, through the floor, through the walls, through the marrow of his spine. "We want to be heard. We want to be planted again in your names."
There was a tree that wasn't there before. Elias saw it at first light, just past the line of familiar trunks, standing alone at the far end of the orchard like it had stepped out from a dream or a grave. It was taller than the others, leaner. Its bark was white, not pale wood or birch, but the sickly color of old bone. The surface looked smooth from afar, but as he walked closer, Elias saw it was not smooth at all. It was crowded, rows upon rows of teeth, embedded into the trunk, some crooked, some baby small, some rotted. Each one pressed into the bark like it had grown there naturally. And worst of all, they smiled.
The tree was smiling. Mouths formed from clusters of molars and canines, gaps that looked like they had once bit through silence itself. Elias stood frozen. He could feel the tree watching him, though it had no eyes. It didn't need them. It had memory. And that was enough. He reached out, almost against his will. The bark pulsed beneath his fingers, a low vibration like the echo of a voice too old to form words. He jerked his hand back. His fingertips bled where splinters of enamel had pierced the skin. Behind him, the orchard rustled. No wind, just the sound of trees breathing together. When he returned to the house, Ruth was sitting in a nursery with her hands on her belly, her face pale, her lips trembling. "It's growing faster," she said. Elias knelt. "The baby?" She shook her head. "Not just the baby, something else." The patterns on her stomach were spreading, no longer veined like roots, but now shaped like rings, as if her body had become a trunk itself, as if the orchard had marked her as soil. That night, Elias dreamed of teeth. He stood beneath the new tree. It spoke to him, not in sound, but through pressure. His own molars ached. Something tugged at his jaw. He opened his mouth and screamed, but no noise came out, only petals. Small, white, sharp-edged petals that cut his tongue as they fell. He awoke in a sweat, hand pressed to his face. Inside his mouth, nothing had changed, except on his pillow, one of his molars. Clean, whole, removed without pain. Beside it, a smear of sap. In the corner of the room, the shadows curled tighter than before. That morning, Anya stood in the kitchen holding something, wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it carefully on the table. It was a branch, thin, twisted, ivory white, studded with baby teeth. "Where did you find this?" Elias asked. "In the crib," she whispered. They burned it in the fireplace. It didn't burn. It smiled as the flames licked its edges, blackening the tips but leaving the teeth untouched. By sunset, more teeth had begun appearing. On the porch, beneath the sink, stuck to the bottoms of their shoes, in Ruth's hand as she slept. Each one different, each one perfect, as if chosen. The villagers had vanished. The phone lines were dead, windows shuttered, homes locked. Elias felt the weight of it all, the generations of denial, the years of grief planted like seeds in secret. And now the orchard was blooming, but not with fruit, not with leaves, with reminders. Bones, hair, and now teeth. That night, Ruth screamed. Elias rushed to the nursery. The floor was trembling. The crib was rocking violently. The mobile above it spun in reverse. Ruth clutched her stomach, gasping. "It's not mine! It's not our child!" she sobbed. Elias held her, but the air grew thick, too thick to breathe. The walls pulsed, the shadows twitched. From under the floorboards came a sound, gnashing, like 100 tiny mouths grinding bone. From beneath the crib, something began to rise. Not a body, a root, thick, yellowed, wrapped in strands of hair. It writhed upward like a hand reaching blindly. Elias grabbed the crib and flung it aside. The root stopped, quivered, then slowly retreated into the floor. The boards sealed themselves. Anya entered the stairway, silent. She looked at the spot, then at Elias. "We're not standing on wood anymore. We're standing on teeth," she whispered. The next day, the tree had changed again. New mouths had formed, wider, hungrier, and beneath it, laid gently in the grass, was a jawbone. Small, delicate, human, wrapped in a cloth with Ruth's maiden name stitched into the corner.
There was a place in the orchard where no one ever dug. Even in childhood, Elias had felt it, an invisible line drawn between trees, not by fences or markers, but by a hush, a pressure in the air. Even the elders avoided it. Even the wind did not pass through it. It was the center, the belly of the orchard, and he was going there now. Ruth slept behind shuttered windows, her body hot with fever, her skin marked by deeper spirals each hour. Anya sat by her side, whispering names to keep the air still. Neither of them tried to stop Elias when he packed the shovel, because they knew the orchard would never stop until something deeper was pulled up, something that had never been meant to see light. He crossed the threshold of the inner ring at dusk. The silence was immediate. No birds, no rustling, not even his own breath sounded right. The ground here felt different, thicker, not with roots, but with weight. Memory pressed into every inch of soil. He chose a spot beneath a crooked tree, its bark split open like a wound, its limbs bent in prayer or collapse. He drove the shovel down. The ground gave easily, too easily. No stones, no roots, just soft, wet earth like old bread. With every scoop, the air grew colder. After a few feet, he hit something. Not wood, not bone. Fabric. He dropped to his knees, cleared the dirt with trembling hands. A bundle, wrapped in oilcloth, stained with something darker than mud, tied with a thin red string. He hesitated, then untied it. Inside, a dress, child-sized, embroidered with delicate flowers now faded and stiff with time. And beneath the dress, a ledger, handwritten, fragile. He opened it. Names, dates, ages, then designations. Taken, given, planted, remembered, forgotten. Dozens of them. At the bottom of each page, a signature. Lenka, the first mother, the one no one spoke of. He turned to the final page. His mother's name was there. So was Ruth's, and his own, all marked, planted, not buried. He staggered back. The ground trembled. The tree above him creaked, a long, hollow groan that sounded less like wood and more like a throat clearing after years of silence. From behind him, a voice, thin, feminine, familiar. You shouldn't have opened it. He turned. No one there. Only the orchard, leaning closer. When he returned to the house, the lights flickered. Ruth was awake, eyes wild, lips cracked. "It's inside me," she whispered. "Not the child, the root. It's not just growing, it's claiming." He showed her the ledger. She stared at her name. "I was never supposed to leave this place," she said. "I wasn't born in the city. My mother ran when she was pregnant with me, but the soil never forgot." Anya spoke from the corner. "They planted us all in pieces, through blood, through silence, through forgetting." "What do we do?" Elias asked. She looked at the ledger, and then at the shovel still in his hand.
we finish what they were too afraid to complete. That night, they returned to the forbidden center. Ruth could barely walk, but she came anyway, held up by Elias, her breath shallow, her hands trembling. They dug together. At 4 feet down, the soil changed, became red, like clay soaked in blood. At 5 feet, they found wood, old, swollen, a coffin, not nailed shut, tied shut with human hair. Anya cut it with a knife. The lid opened on its own. Inside, a woman, perfectly preserved, eyes open, smiling. And beneath her skin, roots. They threaded from her mouth, her wrists, her ankles, burrowed into the walls of the coffin, into the soil. She wasn't resting, she was feeding. Ruth stepped forward. "She's not dead," she said. Elias grabbed her arm. "Don't." But Ruth reached in, touched the woman's chest. The body moved. Its mouth opened, and from within it came a whisper, not sound, but wind. "Your grief has grown well." The ground shook, the trees moaned. Roots burst from the soil, wrapping around the coffin, pulling it down. The woman smiled wider, and then she vanished, sucked into the earth with a terrible slurping sound, like something being devoured by its own children. Silence followed. No birds, no breath, only Ruth's quiet sobbing. "It wasn't just about forgetting," she said. "It was about never speaking, never grieving." He held her. "We've opened it," Anya whispered. "We can't bury it again." No one disagreed. The orchard wasn't a secret anymore. It was a mouth, and it had been fed.
The orchard was changing, not gradually, visibly. Its trees swayed even when the wind did not blow. Their limbs twisted, stretching inward toward the house like fingers trying to pry open a door that had already been unlocked. And something else had begun to grow, not from the trees, but from the ground, and worse, from them. That morning, Ruth awoke screaming. Elias rushed to her side, expecting blood, pain, loss. But what he found was something stranger, a shape pressing outward from beneath her skin. Not the baby, something else. A bulge, moving, shifting, dragging itself beneath her ribcage like a creature circling for rest. She gasped. "It's not the baby anymore. It's both." Elias laid his hand gently on her side. Something pulsed. Then it tapped, like a finger knocking from the inside, 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. Elias staggered back. Anya stood at the doorway, pale, quiet. "They're not trying to return. They're trying to be born." Later, Ruth showed them her wrists. A pattern had appeared, faint lines in her skin, too symmetrical to be natural, too strange to be dismissed. They weren't veins, they were roots. And in the crook of each arm, small white buds had begun to push through her pores, soft, moist, like blossoms made from skin. Elias tried to cut one away. It grew back overnight. That evening, the orchard howled. The trees didn't move, but the space between them did. The air shimmered, reality bent, and the center of the grove split open like a mouth. From it crawled something, not fast, not loud, but steady. A form made of twisted bark and wet bones, arms too long, eyes stitched shut. Its belly swelled, rounded like a woman in late pregnancy. It moved toward the house,
Anya barred the door, but Ruth rose from her chair and opened it. Elias shouted, pulled her back, slammed the door shut. "What are you doing?" Ruth's eyes were glass. Her voice wasn't her own. "She's ready. I carried her once before. She wants out." That night, the nursery changed. The crib was no longer a crib. It had split open like a seed pod. Inside it, mulch, hair, tiny teeth pressed into the wood. The rocking chair moved on its own, back and forth, back and forth. Whispers filled the walls, voices of children, women, the dead. We are roots. We are memory. We are ready. Ruth walked barefoot into the room. She sat in the chair. Her belly twitched, not with life, but with multiples. Shadows pushed beneath her skin, branching, kicking. "I can feel their fingers," she said calmly. "They're trying to find the surface." Elias couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Anya stepped forward and placed her hand on Ruth's shoulder. "We can still stop it. We can still dig it out." Ruth turned to her, tears falling silently. "It's me now. You can't cut out grief once it's taken a name." And then, from her mouth, she began to hum. The same 5-note lullaby that Anya had whispered for days. Only now it was complete, full, haunting. And from the orchard, the trees hummed back. Their leaves shivered in time, their trunks vibrated, and the dirt in the nursery began to rise. Roots burst through the floorboards, thin, pale, weeping roots. They wrapped around her ankles. Elias tried to pull them away, but the moment he touched them, they pulsed. A memory flashed behind his eyes. Him as a child, screaming at a coffin being lowered into the orchard soil. Not his mother's, his twins. He fell back. Ruth wept. "She's been waiting all this time. She was promised a body, promised a name, and I'm the only vessel left." The house creaked. From every corner, blossoms burst open. Not white now, red, bloody red, slick with sap and tears. The wallpaper peeled, the lights went out, and from beneath the house, something rose. Not walking, not crawling, forming. A body built from bones, bark, sorrow, and teeth. It had no face, just a single word carved into its chest. Lenka.
The orchard was no longer waiting. It was calling. Not with words, not with wind, but with pull. A slow, aching summons that crawled beneath the skin, pressed into the ears, curled around the spine like a vine. It didn't shout, it whispered, and every living thing heard it. Elias was the first to feel it, that strange sensation in his feet, like the ground was breathing just beneath him, like the orchard wanted him closer, as if the soil remembered his name and was hungry for it. By morning, the trees had moved, not grown, moved. The rows were different, narrower, closer to the house. When he looked from the window, what had once been a clear path now curved inward, drawing toward the center like a spiral, like a noose tightening. The orchard was no longer a place, it was a mouth, and it was opening. Inside, Ruth was fading. Her skin had grown translucent, not pale, thin, as if the layers between blood and air had started to dissolve. Veins glowed beneath her arms, fingers trembled in rhythm with the earth. But she didn't seem afraid.
She sat in the nursery, hands folded calmly across her belly, and said, "She's almost here." Elias fell to his knees before her. "We can still fight this!" Ruth smiled. "This is the fight. This is what happens when generations bury sorrow instead of grieving it. The orchard was never cursed. It was ignored." That afternoon, Anya vanished. They searched the house, the cellar, the back rooms. Nothing. Only her shoes by the door, and a single note scratched into the wood beneath them. She called. I went. Elias ran into the orchard. No map, no direction, just instinct. The trees no longer felt like trees. They watched. They bent. Their roots tangled underfoot, always just behind his steps, as if waiting to catch his fall. He found her eventually, kneeling in the center clearing, barefoot, silent, hands planted in the soil as if in prayer. The soil around her pulsed, breathing in unison with her chest. When she looked up, her eyes were black, not evil, empty. She whispered, "I remember everything now." He tried to reach her, but the ground cracked between them. A thin line opened, revealing nothing but darkness beneath. Then a sound, children's laughter, but wrong, layered, woven with weeping. From the shadows rose forms, dozens of them, children, half-formed, with bark where skin should be, bones poking from wrists like thorns. They didn't run, they didn't speak, they only pointed toward the house, toward Ruth, and turned, walking slowly, together, returning to what they believed was theirs. Anya didn't resist. She stood and followed, not in fear, not entranced, but like someone answering the phone after years of silence. Elias chased them. Branches tore at his clothes, roots snapped at his heels. But he reached the house just before they did. He barred the door, locked every window, stood panting in the foyer. Then he saw it. The walls. They had begun to bloom. Teeth, dozens of them, pushing through the wallpaper, grinning. The orchard had grown inside. And Ruth was standing now, her eyes wide, her belly glowing faintly. "She's crowning," she whispered. Elias took her hands. "We're not letting her in!" Ruth's voice was calm. "She's already here." From under the floorboards came the creak of wood splitting. From the nursery came the sound of a rocking chair moving on its own. From outside came the children surrounding the house, tapping on the windows, smiling with mouths they never had in life. Anya stood among them, eyes blank. "She wants her family back," she said. And then the house groaned, a deep, splitting sound. Boards snapped, paint cracked, windows fogged from within. Ruth fell to her knees, screaming now. Elias caught her, cradled her, rocked her gently. But it wasn't labor. It was transformation. Roots pushed from her back, petals from her eyes, and in her final clear moment, she whispered, "The orchard wasn't planted to bury grief. It was planted to birth it." The door splintered, and the orchard came inside. It was morning, but no light came through the windows. The sky had dimmed to the color of dried blood, thick, dark, and unmoving. Fog hugged the ground outside like a burial shroud that refused to lift. Inside the house, there were no sounds, no crying, no footsteps, only the gentle rhythm of wood creaking over and over like something was rocking. Elias woke on the nursery floor, unsure of when he collapsed. The air smelled of iron and roses. His arms were covered in dirt. His mouth tasted like soil. And beside him, where Ruth had been, there was only fabric, a dress, hand-stitched, pure white, but not made of cloth, woven bone. Each panel a lattice of tiny ribs, shoulder seams sewn with strands of hair, the skirt layered with paper-thin vertebrae, polished smooth, arranged like delicate lace. Elias stared, breath trembling. There was no blood, no sign of struggle, just the dress, and beside it, a single tooth, still wet. He stood, called for Anya, for Ruth. No answer, only the creak of the rocking chair in the nursery. He turned toward it slowly. It was no longer empty. A figure sat there, slender, motionless, draped in a bridal veil that shimmered like fog in moonlight. The veil shifted with each breath, because whoever sat beneath it was still alive. He approached, knees buckling, heart pounding. He reached out, pulled the veil back, and saw her, Ruth, changed, eyes glazed, pale as ash, lips stitched with something that looked like vine. Her body had accepted the orchard. Blossoms bloomed from her collarbones, roots twisted around her fingers like rings. But she was not afraid. She was radiant, beautiful in the way only something sacred and wrong can be. And she smiled. "It's time," she whispered. Her voice sounded like wind through leaves. Elias staggered back. "This isn't you." But she only rose to her feet, the dress creaking softly, the sound of ribs grinding together. "I am what grief made me," she said. "I am what was planted, what grew, what came to bloom." From the corners of the room, the children appeared, silent, barefoot, petaled eyes and sharpened teeth, each carrying offerings, dolls, locks of hair, faded bones wrapped in cloth. They circled her, humming. Anya stepped into the room last, but she wasn't alone. She carried something in her arms, swaddled in cloth, moving, breathing, a baby. Not Ruth's, not anyone's, new, old, other. She handed it to Ruth, who took it without question, cradled it, kissed its forehead. It opened its eyes, black, unblinking. Ruth turned to Elias. "She has her body now. She has her name. She is born." From the outside, the orchard moaned. The sound was joyous, wet, full, a wedding dirge made from wind and weeping. The house groaned, walls bending outward like ribs expanding. And then, footsteps, dozens of them, the villagers, those who had vanished. They entered the yard in silence, dressed in their own decay, mouths sewn shut, hands full of dirt. They lined the orchard, forming an aisle, waiting for the bride. Elias followed them with numb feet. Ruth stepped forward, barefoot on soft soil, holding the child. Blossoms fell from the trees like confetti. A crown of thorns lowered from the branches above and settled upon her brow. Anya walked beside her, humming the lullaby. Elias didn't speak, couldn't, because some part of him understood this had always been the end. The orchard did not feed on sorrow alone. It needed ritual, witnesses, vows. Ruth stood before the oldest tree, the one made of teeth. She placed the child at its base. Roots rose to receive it, wrapped it gently, held it like a cradle. Ruth knelt, spoke her final vow. From my grief, I give her flesh. From my silence, I give her voice. From my body, I give her home. The ground cracked. Light poured up, red, thick, blooming with memory. The villagers bowed, the orchard breathed in, and Ruth became still. She did not fall, she was planted. The roots took her, slowly, lovingly, pulled her down petal by petal, until all that remained was the veil, caught in the wind like a ghost's last sigh, and the child, cradled by bark, eyes wide, smiling.
The moon rose red that night. Not pink, not amber. Red, like blood diluted with memory. Like something had bled into the sky and no one dared to wipe it clean. It hung low above the orchard, swollen and watchful, casting long shadows that twisted wrong, bending away from the trees instead of with them. The ground shimmered. The bark on every trunk gleamed wetly as though sweating, and beneath the light they gathered, the children, the villagers, the forgotten, the roots. Elias stood alone on the porch, watching them come. He held nothing, not a weapon, not a torch, just the old ledger from the pit. The names inside had begun to fade, as if the book too knew it was nearly finished. Inside the house, silence ruled. The rocking chair was still. The cradle was gone. The floor no longer creaked. There was nothing left to resist. The orchard had taken its bride. Now it had come for its harvest. Anja approached from the dark. Her hair hung in loose strands, matted with sap. Her hands were stained red, her dress torn, but her eyes were calm, empty of fear, filled with understanding. "It's time," she said. Elias shook his head. "I never planted anything." She looked at him with pity. "You lived. That was enough. We were all planted the day we stopped speaking of what hurt us." He clutched the ledger tighter. "There has to be a way to undo this." She stepped closer. "There is." She touched his chest, right over his heart. "You give it something that remembers." The crowd in the orchard parted, and from between the trees, Ruth emerged, or something wearing her shape. She moved like wind in tall grass, fluid, soft, inevitable. Her eyes glowed faintly, lit by the reflection of the moon. In her arms, the child. It cooed softly, though it had no mouth. Roots trailed behind her steps like a veil. She stopped at the tree of teeth, the oldest, the first, the one that had been waiting. The villagers gathered around and began to sing. Low, wordless, harmonic, a sound older than any language. Elias stepped forward. His legs barely carried him, but something pulled him on, a thread of memory stretching from his chest to the soil, taut and trembling. Ruth looked at him and smiled. "You were always meant to stay. You tried to run, but grief remembers its shape." He fell to his knees. "I want to forget." Ruth shook her head. "No one forgets, they just bury, and burying is what feeds the root." The moon flared above them, blood bright, a signal. The trees began to sway in unison. The roots rose from the ground, not fast, not violent, but steady.
like arms coming up to receive what was owed. The tree of teeth split open, its trunk parted down the middle like a mouth preparing for communion. Ruth stepped toward it, child in her arms. She placed the child inside. The bark folded inward, closed, sealed. The song grew louder. Now the villagers held bones in their hands, old, personal, offerings. One by one they laid them at the base of the tree. Finger bones, skulls, teeth, labeled with names only the orchard knew. Anja turned to Elias. "You're the last." He stood, shaking. He pulled the ledger close, then opened it to the final page. There, new names had appeared. Not written in ink, etched in blood. His, Anja's, Ruth's, and beneath them all, the one who remembered. He tore the page out, walked to the tree, and set it on the ground. The roots rose, coiled around it, pulled it under. The earth closed with a sigh. The moon began to dim. The light faded. One by one, the villagers dropped to their knees. So did the children. So did Anja. Ruth remained standing, her body now translucent. Petals fell from her shoulders. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "Let it be done." The orchard exhaled, the trees bowed, and the harvest was complete.
Even now, years after the last scream faded into the forest, the villagers say the smoke never rises from the altar house again. The ashes remain cold, untouched by flame, no matter how much wood they pile. The gods, it seems, no longer hunger, perhaps full, or perhaps finally dead. But the silence they left behind is worse than any scream. The village stands, barely, no singing, no drums, only the wind dragging its feet across crumbling soil. Doors creak, but never open. Children are born with shadows in their eyes. Mothers rock cradles that hold nothing but bones. And the sun, though it still rises, seems tired of trying. No one mentions Madzu's name, not aloud, not even in whispers. They have buried her 1,000 times in thought, but the earth keeps rejecting her. Some say the forest still holds her breath, that it waits for a new offering, a new girl, a new secret, a new grief. But no one dares enter the trees now. Even the birds avoid the sky above it. And at the heart of the village, where the festival used to glow with fire and blood and false joy, there is only one thing left, a cracked mask, half smiling, half screaming. And behind it, if you look closely, something still watches.